The fluorescent light above the defendant's table in courtroom 7B of the Ontario Superior Court had a flicker in it, a tiny one, barely visible unless you'd been staring at the ceiling for 40 minutes trying not to look at the man sitting 12 feet away from you. That flicker is the thing I remember most. Not the bailiff's voice, not the smell of the room, which was photocopier toner and someone's overheated coffee. Not even the look on my husband's face when he stood up and pointed at me like I was a parking violation he was contesting. What I remember is that flicker, because I'd spent so long staring at it that by the time everything fell apart, I almost felt grateful to it for giving me somewhere safe to look. My name is Vanessa Holt. I was 31 when my husband filed for divorce, and I'd have told you, right up until about 6 months before that filing, that we had a good marriage. Not perfect. Nobody's is. But good in the way that matters, the way where you don't think about it too hard, because it's just there, holding the shape of your life the way a load-bearing wall holds up a house. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the part that actually matters, which is the morning Ryan's lawyer stood up in front of Justice Whitaker and said the words that made the floor of my stomach disappear. Your Honor, the applicant would like to enter evidence of the respondent's infidelity. I was wearing a navy suit my lawyer had told me to buy specifically. Not black, because black reads as funeral or as someone trying too hard to look serious, and not anything bright, because bright reads as someone who isn't taking this seriously enough. Navy. Professional. A woman who has her life together, which is a strange thing to be performing when your life is, in fact, in the process of being dismantled in a government building on University Avenue. Across the aisle sat Ryan Pemberton, the man I'd married 9 years earlier in a backyard in Burlington, with string lights and his aunt's potato salad, wearing a charcoal suit I'd helped him pick out at a Harry Rosen sale 2 years before because he never could commit to clothing decisions on his own. He looked, that morning, like a man who had rehearsed looking wronged. I want to be fair to him even now, even after everything, so I'll say this. He was good at it. He'd always been good at things like that, at presenting a version of a situation that made him the reasonable one. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a man walked through it, and I felt my heart do something it had never done before. A kind of lurch and stall, like an engine flooding. Because I knew him. Of course I knew him. Just not the way Ryan's lawyer was about to suggest I knew him. I want to tell you how I got to that room, because nothing about that morning started in that room. It started 2 years earlier, in a life that looked, from any reasonable outside vantage point, completely fine. I was 22 when I met Ryan at a curling Bonspiel fundraiser of all places, which is such a Canadian sentence I sometimes laugh just typing it. He was tall and a little awkward and very serious about a sport that, frankly, nobody should be that serious about, and he remembered my coffee order the second time we ran into each other, which, at 22, felt like the height of romantic competence. We dated for 3 years, got engaged on a hike near Squamish during a trip out west, and married the following June. We bought our house in the Beaches in 2018. A narrow 2-story with a porch Ryan promised, every single spring, he was going to repaint and never once did. The mortgage was $2,890 a month, which felt like an enormous, terrifying number when we signed the papers, and then, 2 years later, felt almost ordinary once my business had grown enough to absorb it without flinching. We had a cat named Gus who knocked exactly 1 wine glass off the counter per month, like clockwork, and was otherwise the best decision either of us ever made independently of each other. We had a life that, on the surface, looked like the kind of life you put on a holiday card. I ran a communications consultancy called Holt & Mercer. No relation to anyone. I just liked the sound of it when I started the company at 26 with $11,000 of savings and a laptop that overheated if you ran more than 4 tabs. By the time Ryan filed for divorce, that company was billing just under $410,000 a year, with 3 full-time staff, a small office on King Street West, and a client roster that included 2 national retail brands and 1 telecom account I'd spent 18 months courting before they finally signed. I was proud of it in the slightly embarrassing way you're proud of something that cost you a piece of yourself to build. Ryan worked in property management, overseeing a portfolio of commercial buildings for a mid-sized firm downtown. He was competent at it, not exceptional. He made about $88,000 a year, and he had a particular tone he used when he mentioned that number, like he was bracing for someone to find it disappointing before they'd had the chance to. I never made a thing of the gap between our incomes. I genuinely didn't think it mattered. I was wrong about that, though I didn't understand how wrong until much later. We didn't fight, is the thing people always ask about first. Were there arguments? Were there signs? And the honest answer is that our marriage wasn't loud enough to fight in. It was more like a house where someone had quietly turned the thermostat down 0.5 degree every month for 2 years, and you kept telling yourself you'd notice the cold eventually and do something about it. And then, one day, you looked down and realized you'd been wearing a sweater indoors for months, without registering it as strange. The person who matters to the rest of this story is a man named Desmond Achebe. Desmond was 41, originally from Calgary, a freelance brand strategist I'd hired about 16 months before the divorce proceedings started. He came to me through a referral from a client I trusted completely, with a portfolio that made me a little jealous of his eye for typography, and a day rate of $700 that I didn't negotiate because the work was clearly worth it. We worked together on 2 rebranding projects over 14 months. We had probably 40 meetings, most of them in my office's small boardroom, a handful of them at a cafe on Queen Street East when our building's HVAC system was being replaced and the office was unbearable. We texted about deadlines and font choices and whether a particular shade of teal was reading as corporate or as dated. We were colleagues. That's the entire, complete truth of what Desmond Achebe was to me. But Ryan had decided something different, and Ryan had spent, as I'd later find out, the better part of 7 months constructing a case around that decision. The first time something felt off, I dismissed it inside of a minute, which is the kind of thing I replay now and want to reach back through time and shake some sense into myself over. It was a Thursday in late September. I'd come home late from the office. We'd been in back-to-back client calls finalizing a launched campaign, and I walked in through the side door, dropped my bag on the kitchen island, and found Ryan standing at the counter with his phone face down beside the kettle and an expression on his face that looked, for lack of a better word, rehearsed, like he'd been standing there practicing what to look like before I came in. "Hey," I said, "rough day. Is there any of that chili left?" "Fridge," he said. I got the chili. I heated it up. I turned around and he was still standing there with that same careful blankness, and I asked, "You good?" "Fine," he said. "You sure? You look like you're somewhere else." "I'm fine, Vanessa." He picked up his phone and went upstairs. I ate my chili leaning against the counter and thought, he's stressed about the building inspection thing at work. I thought we should plan something for the weekend. We haven't really talked in a while. I did not think, my husband is watching me right now the way you watch a door you're waiting to walk through. I did not think that the look on his face wasn't tiredness or stress, but something far colder than that. The particular stillness of someone who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the moment to act on it. 3 weeks after that, I came home to find Gus shut out on the back deck at 9:40 at night in October weather, which Ryan absolutely knew I'd never allow. That cat had asthma and a vet bill history to prove it. When I brought him in, shaking, and asked Ryan why the cat had been locked outside, he said he hadn't noticed how late it had gotten. I stood there in the kitchen with Gus pressed against my chest, looking at my husband's face, and something in my own chest shifted. Not alarm exactly. More like the first faint hum of a tuning fork being struck somewhere down the hall. I should have followed that sound to its source. I didn't. The month before the court date, I found out exactly how far Ryan had taken things. My lawyer, a woman named Fiona Marsh, who I'd hired off a recommendation from a friend who'd gone through her own ugly split 2 years earlier, called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and the tone in her voice. Flat, deliberate, the particular careful register lawyers use when they've rehearsed a sentence they don't want to say. Told me it was bad before she'd said a single word of substance. "Vanessa," she said, "I need you to come in tomorrow morning." Ryan's counsel filed a supplementary disclosure this afternoon, and I'm looking at it right now. What's in it? A pause. Photographs. A timeline document. And a witness statement. I sat down on the floor of my office. Not the chair, which was right there, perfectly available. The floor. I don't know why. I pressed my phone against my ear and said, "A witness to what, Fiona?" "To you and Desmond Achebe entering and leaving a hotel on Front Street on the evening of April 9th. My brain went very quiet for a second, and then it caught up all at once. "We had a client dinner there," I said. "The client was staying at that hotel for a conference. We used the business center to finalize a deck because my laptop died and I'd left my charger at the office. We were there for under an hour. Desmond took an Uber home. I took an Uber home. I have both receipts. Do you have anything documenting the client dinner itself?" "I have the email confirmation. I have the calendar invite. I have the file with the edit timestamp from the Business Center's network." I was already on my feet, already crossing to my computer. "Fiona, I have all of it." "Good," she said. "Bring everything tomorrow." I spent that night assembling 6 months of records, invoices, calendar entries, ride-share receipts, project notes, email threads that referenced Desmond by name in entirely unglamorous professional contexts. 41 separate pieces of documentation showing that every interaction Desmond Achebe and I had ever had was scheduled, client-related, and about as romantic as a tax form. I printed it all, tabbed it, organized it into a binder with my consultancy's logo still on the cover page because it was the only binder I owned. I didn't sleep. I drank coffee until my hands had a faint tremor and watched the sky over my street go from black to the pale gray that passes for dawn in Toronto in late autumn. And somewhere around 5 in the morning I thought, with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months, let him try. That was the thing Ryan had badly miscalculated. He'd spent 7 months building a narrative. I'd 9 years building a business. And running a business teaches you exactly one lesson above everything else. Document everything, because the world is full of people who will remember things in whatever shape is most convenient for them, and the only thing that cuts through a disputed version of reality is a paper trail nobody can argue with. I had the paper trail. Ryan had no idea yet how complete it was. The morning of the hearing, Fiona met me outside the courthouse at 8:45. She had a leather portfolio under one arm and what I'd started thinking of as her court face. Stiller than her usual expression, more deliberate, like a setting had been adjusted on a dial somewhere behind her eyes. "He's going to make it ugly before it gets better," she said. "Let him try. Okay. Don't react to anything. Don't look at Ryan. Don't look at the witness, whoever he produces. Look at me or look at the judge. When it's our turn, we walk it through, piece by piece, calmly, understood. She put a hand briefly on my arm. I've gone through everything you gave me 3 times. You're going to be fine. I nodded. I didn't entirely believe her. I walked in anyway, because what was the alternative? The first hour of the hearing was procedural, motions, a dispute over a valuation report, the kind of thing I tracked at a distance while my body sat very still inside that navy suit. Then Ryan's lawyer, a man named Gareth Voss, with the unhurried, satisfied bearing of someone who had never once lost a case he believed he'd already won, pivoted to the infidelity allegation. "Your Honor," Gareth said, "the applicant submits that the respondent engaged in an extramarital relationship with Mr. Desmond Achebe, a contractor retained by her company, over a period of approximately 14 months. We have photographic evidence, a private investigator's report, and a witness prepared to speak to the nature of the relationship." He called Desmond to the stand. Desmond walked through the back door of the courtroom and crossed to the witness box, and I watched him the entire way. Here is what I can tell you about Desmond Achebe in that moment. He looked completely composed. Not nervous, not ashamed. Nothing in his posture had the quality of a man about to participate in a lie. He sat down, folded his hands, and when the clerk asked him to state his name for the record, he gave it without hesitation. Gareth began with the photographs, handed copies to the judge, narrated them aloud. Mr. Achebe and the respondent entering the hotel on Front Street. Mr. Achebe and the respondent at a cafe on Queen Street East. Mr. Achebe and the respondent in the parking structure of her office building, standing close together, appearing to be mid-conversation. "Mr. Achebe," Gareth said, "how would you characterize your relationship with Ms. Holt?" Desmond looked at him. Then he looked at me. A brief, steady look, nothing readable in it. Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out his phone. "Your Honor," he said, "before I answer, I'd like to request permission to play a recording." The courtroom went very still. Gareth's head turned towards Desmond with the sharpness of a man who has just heard something his script hadn't accounted for. Justice Whitaker leaned forward slightly. "What sort of recording, Mr. Achebe?" "A phone call, Your Honor, between myself and Ryan Pemberton. Recorded in Ontario, where one-party consent applies to call recording, and I was one of the 2 parties on the call. It took place on August 17th of this year, roughly 2 months before today's proceeding." Fiona was on her feet before Gareth could fully process what had been said. "Your Honor, the respondent would like the court to hear this recording and requests it be entered as evidence." Gareth stood too. "Objection. This is entirely irregular. The witness can't simply—" "It's a statement made by the applicant himself," Fiona said, her voice perfectly level. "It bears directly on the credibility of the evidence the applicant has submitted." Justice Whitaker looked at Gareth. He looked at Fiona. He looked at Desmond, still holding his phone. "I'll hear it," he said. "Proceed." Desmond pressed play. The audio was clear enough that Ryan's voice filled the courtroom without any room for doubt about whose voice it was. And what that voice said, in a conversation Desmond had apparently anticipated needing to record long enough in advance to actually do it, was this: "Desmond, listen. I know you and Vanessa have a professional relationship. I know that. But I need you to understand what's on the line for me financially here. She built that company during our marriage, which under Ontario law means I'm entitled to an equalization payment on its value. But my lawyer says if I can show infidelity, even just enough to muddy the picture, it puts real pressure on her to settle quickly instead of dragging this out. I'm not asking you to lie, exactly. I'm asking you to be vague. Don't deny it outright if you're called. Let people draw their own conclusions. I'll make it worth your while. I'm talking $15,000. The silence after that had actual physical weight to it. I could feel it pressing down through the room, through the bench, through the soles of my shoes. Then Ryan's recorded voice again. You've been alone with her in hotel business centers, at coffee shops, late at the office. Nobody needs to know what did or didn't happen between you two. They just need to wonder. Desmond stopped the playback. I looked at Justice Whittaker, the contempt that had been resting on his face all morning. Aimed, I'd assumed, at me, was still there, but it had rotated 180 degrees. Gareth Voss had gone very still at his table. Ryan, beside him, had turned a particular gray-white color, the color of a man who has just watched the ground open up beneath the chair he was sitting in. Fiona was already moving. She submitted Desmond's full statement, the metadata confirming the recording's date and duration, and a follow-up text message Ryan had sent 4 days after the call that read, in its entirety, "Think about what I offered. It's a good deal for you." She submitted my binder, all 41 exhibits, tabbed and indexed, including the Hotel Business Center's login records showing Desmond and I logged in and out 41 minutes apart on April 9th, alongside an email thread to our client that began at 9:04 that same evening, referencing the finalized deck we'd just submitted. Then she stood at the podium and said, in that same level, unhurried voice, "Your Honor, the applicant did not discover an affair. He manufactured the appearance of one and attempted to bribe a witness into supporting a fabricated narrative. Every piece of evidence the applicant has submitted is either taken out of context or deliberately misrepresented. The respondent has documentation refuting each exhibit individually. And the applicant, in his own recorded words, has confirmed he knew there was nothing there to find." She paused. "We'd like to address the matter of costs, and we'll be referring the witness tampering issue separately." What followed over the next 2 months wasn't quick, and it wasn't painless, and anyone who's told you that vindication feels clean has never actually sat through the process of getting it. There were further appearances. A formal complaint was filed regarding Ryan's attempt to influence a witness, which in Ontario is treated as a serious matter regardless of whether the bribe was ever accepted. Gareth Voss withdrew from representing him within 3 weeks. Ryan retained new counsel, a quieter man whose entire posture in subsequent hearings read as damage control rather than advocacy. The equalization claim was resolved substantially in my favor, on the basis that the growth in Holt and Mercer's value during the marriage was attributable almost entirely to my individual labor, client relationships, and professional expertise, with no demonstrable contribution from Ryan. I kept the company. I kept the client list. I kept the King Street office, the house in the Beaches. The one with the porch he never got around to repainting was ordered sold, with the net proceeds split, which worked out to about $61,000 each after the mortgage was discharged. It wasn't exactly what either of us would have wanted, probably, but it was what the math said was fair. Ryan was separately referred for the witness tampering matter. It moved through the system slowly and quietly, the way these things often do when no actual money changed hands, and he ended up with a conditional sentence and a fine rather than anything that would follow him around for the rest of his life. I learned about the resolution through a 2-line email from Fiona. I didn't feel triumphant reading it. I felt tired in a way that sat underneath my bones. Desmond texted me the day after the recording was played. It said, "He came to me about 2 months before the hearing. I told him no on the spot. Then I started recording every call after that, just in case. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." I wrote back, "You showed up when it counted. Thank you. We haven't talked much since. He's based out west again now, working with new clients. I think about him sometimes. About the particular kind of steadiness it takes to record an attempted bribe, and then walk into a courtroom and play it out loud, knowing exactly how much it's going to detonate a situation that, strictly speaking, had nothing to do with him. That's a quality I don't have a precise word for. I'm not sure there's a word big enough. Gus came with me, which was never up for negotiation, and to Ryan's credit, it's the one thing in the entire process he didn't fight me on. I live in a one-bedroom in Leslieville now, second floor, good light in the mornings. No condo board emails about my Christmas lights because there's no condo board, just a landlord who texts me about the furnace once a year. Holton Mercer had its strongest quarter ever in the 6 months after the divorce was finalized, and I think there's something about surviving a thing that publicly tries to take you apart that sharpens your focus in ways you can't manufacture any other way. My staff know the broad shape of what happened. We don't talk about it much. We just work. My mother called me the week the final order came through. She said, "I never trusted him." I said, "Mom, you gave a toast at our wedding." She said, "I kept it vague on purpose." I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. It wasn't a big laugh, but it was real, and it was mine, and nobody had to explain it to me afterward. Here's what I understand now that I didn't understand before. A marriage can die from silence just as thoroughly as it can die from shouting. I spent years in a house where the temperature kept dropping half a degree at a time, telling myself I'd notice and fix it eventually, and by the time I understood what was actually happening, Ryan had already decided I was a problem to be managed rather than a person he'd promised to stand beside. I don't know exactly when he made that decision. I'm not sure it matters anymore. What matters is this: I documented everything, not because I suspected him of anything specific, just because that's how I'd always run my professional life, out of habit more than anything. And when someone tried to use a handful of true, ordinary facts and surround them with lies, the documentation cut straight through it, the way it always does if you have enough of it. Keep your records, in your business, in your marriage, in everything that matters to you. Not out of suspicion, out of basic respect for what actually happened. Because somewhere down the line, someone may try to tell you your own life didn't happen the way it happened, and the only thing standing between you and their version of events will be whatever proof you thought to keep before you knew you'd ever need it. The house in the Beaches sold to a young couple who told the agent, apparently within the first week, that they were going to finally repaint that porch. I hope they actually do it.